Super light, super capable and super responsive. With bikes such as the all-new Kenevo SL, does that signal the beginning of the end of MTBs as we know them? Today then, we'll be looking at that question, the fine detail, and giving it some welly. Here it is then guys, 170 millimeters of travel front and rear, 29-inch wheels, a 35 Nm motor, which roughly translates to doubling your power, 6 sizes and weighing in size S4 as stock with pedals at 19.60 kilos. In this video, Specialized have sent us an S-Works to give it a workout. So what then do all those things make it? What exactly is the nature of this bike? Is it a gravity style bike like the current Kinevo built for the bike park? Or is it more of an enduro style bike built for monster trails and those big adventures? I'm sure that many of you, like myself, think it is simply a lightweight Kinevo, right? I'm just thinking, before we answer that question, why don't we just look at it? I mean, it is one hell of a bike, right? I think then that we need to look at its stablemates for a more considered answer to this question. Many of you might be already well acquainted with the Knevo SL launched in South Africa in 2020. 150 millimeters of travel, 29-inch wheels and a sub 20 kilo weight. It kicks out 35 Nm of torque and has a 320 watt-hour battery. Very much a trail bike, very much a stump jumper with a motor fitted, some would say. And then of course there's the original Kinevo, 180mm travel with 27.5-inch wheels with the big full power motor kicking out 90 Nm of torque and a hefty 700 watt-hour battery. A machine for the baddest terrain, the biggest breakers and most mangled route systems. Gravity for definite. This bike then is actually a bit of both and also comes with a mighty tag. Now Specialized say no eMTB is lighter or more capable than this bike. Now I'll let you with that thought for a minute while I get down here on this 19.60 kilo bike and introduce you to this bike, the Enduro. Yes, I know it's not an eMTB, but it's actually the closest bike in mindset to the Kenevo SL. I'm actually wondering why they didn't call it the Enduro SL rather than the Kenevo SL. So I think we've established then that it's not actually a lightweight Kenevo, but an e-powered Enduro. But hey, I don't care too much about names. What about the details? For people who've not ridden the bike, would you, if you were to compare, how would you compare it then to the Enduro? I guess that's the question, in terms of the feel when you ride it.
Yeah, so if you're going to compare this to an Enduro, I'd say it's extremely close. The Geo is, you can get it in the exact same setting as the Enduro comes in. Of course, it has the adjustable geometry features that you can tune to your riding conditions. But as far as like the fit and feel of the bike, it's going to be the same as an Enduro. And then descending wise, it is a little bit different, but I would say more of that comes from the weight of the bike and feeling a little bit more planted than an Enduro. I mean, it's got the same fork on it that an Enduro has, and it has very similar kinematics to what the Enduro has. So it's going to feel very familiar. But I think you're just going to have a little bit more control with this bike compared to the Enduro. And that's, like I said, mostly because of the weight of the bike.
So how is it more Enduro than Kinevo then? Well, I'm sure you guys will agree it is definitely of the classic Enduro silhouette. But even Specialized are putting some key messages out there, such as this one. It puts the E into Enduro, or maybe created by trail riders for trail riders, lightweight, responsive and capable. Page 6 of the marketing blurb. Our development team lives, eats, sleeps and dreams single track. And do you know what? I'm getting to page 12 and still I've not heard the word uplift. Now the thing is, having answered the question of what it is, it actually raises another one, because this bike is only 4 kilos heavier than an Enduro, and as Specialized say, it amplifies you ×2. The question is then, why would you buy an Enduro? And you know what? I've got absolutely no idea. And after all, it delivers more of what you want from a ride. In Specialized words, more power to climb, more pop when you need it, more capability everywhere, more laps, more jumps, more drops, and more stoke. I think that statement there kind of partly answers the question which I asked earlier about the beginning of the end for mountain bikes. But let's know what you guys think. And you know what? I feel really strongly about this subject because the Enduro has been a big part of my life even since it was created back in the early part of the century. But what I will add is that please go out and get a demo on an Enduro or the Kenevo SL to make your own mind up about what bike is for you. It really is that important. Now this bike is around 5 kilos lighter than the current Kinevo. It also has 29-inch wheels and 170mm travel compared to 180. In other words, it's a completely different bike. But let's have a look at some of the key details. This bike is made out of carbon fibre and it comes in 6 sizes, Specialized's own unique S sizing. It has all-mountain geometry and is 6-way adjustable like the much acclaimed Enduro. It also has a new suspension tune, but who doesn't these days? But it comes with a 6-bar, 6-pivot frame design, which I guess is pretty pioneering, and also new kinematics and axle path. I think it's interesting that Specialized really have tried to focus people's attention on the handling of this bike above the motor and the battery. And after all, that's how it should be, because a motor and a battery counts for little without good handling. Butcher T7s, great for carving into those turns. Right folks, what have we got in terms of the geometry and why does it matter? Right, first of all, we've got a pretty generous, roomy cockpit on this bike. Remember, this is an S4, I'm 6 foot. You can either measure that by way of the reach or indeed the down tube. Now what that allows you to do is not only move around the bike as you're going down some steeper trails, but also it helps you move forwards and rearwards, whether you're going down or going up to maintain balance. Now, there's a pretty long front center on the bike, which is the measurement from there to there, which is particularly good for the steeper trails. But not only that, remember an e-mountain bike is a 2-way thing, not just a 1-way traffic downhill. So you've got a relatively steep seat-tube angle there to help you maintain your balance going uphill. In terms of the head tube angle, it's 3-way adjustable and it's reasonably slack, and that combined with the reduced offset keeps things pretty calm in a downhill situation. That plus 29-inch wheels, which are certainly the go-to when it comes to speed these days. Now this bike is 6-way adjustable. Yes, adjustable geometry is nothing new. In fact, I had equally as tinkerable geometry on my downhill bike over 20 years ago. I guess the question is, how many eMTBs have adjustable geo and what do you do once you have it? Well, on this bike you can have a 62.5 or 63.5 or 64.5 head angle and move the bottom bracket up or down. I think it really is very cool that this bike is so adjustable. If you look at the extremes of that 6-way adjust, you can either have a 358mm bottom bracket coupled with a steep head tube angle of 64.7, or at the slacker lower end of the spectrum, you can have a 348mm bottom bracket and a 62.5 head angle. So great range of adjustment there. what about this new suspension tune that Specialized talk about then? No, I know that suspension tunes are nothing new, but Specialized say they've taken an integrated approach with this bike. And again, this is nothing new either, because the Sun Downhill team did this back in the 1990s. But it does mean the Specialized have looked at such things as the stiffness, the flex, the kinematics, the leverage rates, the spring curves as a system, not just as individual parts. Is the shock tune different on the Kinevo SL to the Enduro? And if so, why?
You'll see in the press kit the leverage rate in there. It's a little bit more progressive on the Kinevo SL than it is the Enduro. So there's lots more options for the rider if they want to add more volume spacers there. And then there's a little bit more high-speed rebound damping in the Kinevo SL. And that kind of has to do with the sprung versus unsprung weight compared to an Enduro. You know, the wheels are the same weight on both bikes, but the frame itself is considerably heavier with a motor and a battery in it. So we're just adding a little bit extra control there because of the movement of the wheels being a faster rate.
Okay. There's also that 6-bar pivot frame design. Now, Spec say this does many things. The first of these is that the tension links remove side loads on the shock, which can often lead to binding. Secondly, decoupling braking forces so that you have an active suspension. Thirdly, it enables them to engineer the best anti-squat and also anti-rise. And finally, it lowers and centralizes the mass for improved handling. But how does that aspect actually compare to the Enduro? So what about the anti-squat and the anti-rise on this bike? Is how similar is that compared to the non-e-bike?
It's as similar as we could get it. You know, really, Steve, it came down to a packaging exercise. We knew that what we had in the Enduro was really good. The tricky part of the whole thing was, how are we going to fit a motor in this Enduro with a 6-bar layout where everything is so low in the frame already, right? So obviously you have to give somewhere, so you move those pivot points around to accommodate. And we got very, very close with it. So the bike does, you know, I can say it climbs. I think it pedals a little bit better than Enduro, but I mean, right? But yeah, it's not dead on, but it's pretty darn close.
I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but there's a non-e-bike fork on it, right?
Correct. We've done that on our SL bikes because we're trying, again, this is the core trail rider we're going after. We're not trying to dump more weight. Like, we already have a 38 fork, which is extremely stiff on there. This bike isn't like a 50-pound Kinevo, right? So we've tried to save weight where it makes sense. And so that's why we haven't thrown the extra weight at it here and there. We threw the extra weight in 220 millimeter brake rotors, Float X2 shock, 38 forks, like stuff, places where it really counted.
Specialized also have the revised axle path and kinematics. Well, the rear axle moves rearwards in the first part of its travel, which is said to eliminate hang-up on hits. Then it moves forward to disconnect pedaling forces from chain forces and allow that active suspension. Now, the sizing on the Kinevo SL, unsurprisingly, follows in the footsteps of many other bikes, such as the Enduro, the Levo, and the Kinevo. Now, what size-specific sizing actually means is that such things as this area here in particular, the seat tube length and part of the top tube, actually don't change much in between a size small and a size extra large, or should I say a size S1 to S6. So that means you've got a relatively low standover height on the bike. Now, how to choose your sizing is done on your height and also your riding style. So you have a benchmark size, and you can either go smaller or larger depending on your style of riding. So you can either go for a more nimble handling bike or a more stable one. But what I will point out is that longer bikes can actually be agile as well. It simply depends on your speed. So how does the sizing compare on the Kinevo to other turbo bikes? Well, an S4 KSL is certainly slightly larger than a Levo, but not quite as roomy as a Kinevo. But where is the space? Well, the chainstay is slightly longer than a Levo, and the front centre too. In fact, it has more space up front than the Kinevo. The battery on KSL is 320 watt hours, plus of course the range extender at 160 watt hours, which you can take on a plane. And finally the motor, one which the guys have had thousands of hours getting this tuned into just how they wanted to feel on the trail. The unseen but crucial software detail that gives the KSL its character. Right folks, the Mastermind display simply blows my mind. The way you can customize the display and also the metrics. Let me give you an example of the kind of metrics you can get on this bike. You can get altitude, altitude gain, altitude descent, cadence, average cadence, max cadence, clock, total time, stop time, riding time, battery level, consumption, slope, heart rate, average heart rate, target heart rate. These two, which I really use a lot, and those are rider power and motor power. We've also got total power, average total power, power ratio, estimated range, motor odometer, ride distance, current motor support, assist mode, calories, speed, average speed, and max speed. I mean, that is some machine in itself. And maybe it's related to the question I asked earlier, does this signal the beginning of the end for mountain bikes? Well, with stuff like this, with Mastermind, with the motor, the battery, bear in mind, what I didn't mention was the 320 watt hour battery there with obviously the bolt-on battery, which you can have as an extra. I mean, it is simply on another level to non-e-mountain bikes. Well, that was pretty hectic, but it was also pretty composed in pretty beaten up terrain, and I guess that's what 170mm travel, 29-inch wheels and adjustable geometry allows you to do. 6 pivots, 6 link design is pretty sick, but for me, it's that Mastermind display there, the brains of the bike and the metrics that you can tap into, the rider power, the motor power, the cadence. You really can fine tune your ride and really get an insight into what the bike is all about. But for me, whoa, 170mm travel, wow, that's, it's a bit of kit and you need a bit of terrain to get the most of that bike. So folks, let us know your thoughts on the KSL. Thanks for joining us, and Joe Buckley out in California. For me, it's all about the runs, whether it be enduro or downhill. It's a hell of a bike.